Hey you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 28. Nice round number to end the season on. That's right, today is the last episode of season 1. I know. But it's farming season and we got a jam, y'all. So, speaking of we, today's show is with Hannah and myself as interviewed by Kristen Leach from Namu Farm. We had a lot of fun. We talk about our farm, the history of it, how we used to live in an off-grid cabin, and why we moved farms. We talk about our farm values, no-till, obviously, but also just farming with children. That's a big part of it. That's a big part of what we do. We also answer several questions from our Patreon community. Part of the perks over there is that you get to submit questions for growers before I interview them. And we will continue that in Season 2. Season 2, we will be doing one. We hit our $1,000 a month goal on Patreon at the beginning of this month. And I just want to say thank you to the over 130 people who find enough value in this show to support it. If you've been meaning to give, you can still sign up. There are still perks over there. One of the big perks of supporting the show is that we announced this weekend the tickets for the Frith Farm event here at Rough Draft Farmstead. In October, patrons get first notice and first dibs on all of these kinds of events. And there will be more, possibly a lot more, depending on how these go. So check that out at patreon.com/farmerjesse, or if you just appreciate what we do, you can always kick us a few bucks to the show to @NoTillGrowers on Venmo. Truly the vast majority of that money on Patreon and on Venmo, and I'm talking about like 90% of it, as I've said before, affords me to pay people to help me produce, edit, and upload this show. The more that number grows, the more people I can bring on board. The better the equipment I can get, that money makes what we're trying to do here possible. And just real quick, what are we trying to do? First of all, we're just really wanting to aggregate as many no-till methods as we possibly can. But also, the whole reason we're doing this in seasons is that Hannah and I are full-time farmers, doing 2 markets a week right now, plus a CSA and restaurant. So the workload, as predicted, is pretty full at the moment. May, if you didn't know, is short for mayhem. Also, lesser known fact, so is June, July, August, and September. So we'll take the summer off and return in the fall. But with that in mind, I think there is a ton of value, or at least I hope there is, in us being able to test some of the ideas that we hear about on this podcast, not in a backyard, but in, a production model, and then reporting it back to you with some context. So, right? I think that's one thing that makes this podcast and website unique. So I hope you will support it for that. Again, no sponsors this week, but I do want to thank a couple people real quick, like Jackson Roulette of Stonehouse Market Farm, for all his help with the podcast and the website this year. He is as busy as I am, and somehow we managed to get this podcast up and out, and NoTillGrowers.com full of new content almost every day, and I just want to thank him for all the work he does to make that happen. I also really want to thank Kristen Leach for our amazing interview today. She and I had talked about this back in January, and I really loved her episode talking about Namu Farm, and we had a lot of fun doing that interview, so I couldn't wait to have Kristen help me out here, and she kindly obliged. So big thank you to Kristen. Check her out at Namu Farm on Instagram and give her episode a listen if you haven't already. The eggplant story is just super inspiring, which I wonder if that is a sentence anyone else has ever got to say before Kristen. Maybe not. Thank you for that, Kristen. And, of course, an enormous thank you is owed to my wife, Hannah Crabtree. You may or may not realize how big of a role she had in making this podcast and NoTillGrowers.com happen. While I was out in the cooler, literally do this in the cooler, talking to farmers, she was in the house doing overtime watching the kids or managing farm stuff. But that's how much she believes in this, and so I am excited today to introduce you all to her a little bit. My wife is amazing. And for a little context, during this interview, I'm upstairs trying to manage the audio, and Hannah is downstairs with both the kids. Pretty much our lives. Our kids are a huge and important part of what we do all of the time. We have 2 of them. One is 4.5. One is 7 months old and still nursing, and we could not find a sitter for this conversation for the older one, so they both make some cameos. I apologize for that, but I also don't apologize for it. You want a glimpse into Rough Draft Farmstead? Well, this is it, folks. So, enough from me. Let's get to our chat as conducted by the incredible Kristen Leach with Farmer Hannah and Farmer Jesse of Rough Draft Farmstead.
Does this feel weird?
No, it feels a little scary. I'll admit it's a little scary to be on this side.
Turning the tables.
Bring it on.
Okay, well, hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to get to, turn things around and get to ask you guys some questions, Hannah and Jesse. So first, I guess I wanted to just give you a chance to talk about Rough Draft Farmstead, like your actual farm and your story and how you kind of came to this. So what your background is and how you decided to start a farm together and what that's been like.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe I'll start with a kind of general overview of Rough Draft Farmstead, and then Hannah is always significantly better at telling our actual story of how it came to be. So Rough Draft Farmstead in its current iteration is about 3/4 of an acre. We can bump it up to about an acre in fairly short order, but we kind of keep it at about 3/4 of an acre. We're in central Kentucky, so we're about 25 minutes from 35 minutes from Lexington and about an hour from Louisville. We both grew up in this area, so this is kind of home for us. We didn't grow up in this exact area in Lawrenceburg, but we grew up in central Kentucky, so we've spent a lot of time in this area.
That's great. What is like the broader landscape like around you? Like, what does it look like? Is it, like for me, I'm like in this super flat valley, and what's it like where you are?
Oh yeah. So, basically Kentucky is very, especially where we are, there are parts of Kentucky that are flat. Like as you get closer, maybe to Indiana and Ohio, there are a few places like that. And then there's some out in the West. But here in central Kentucky, everything is rolling hills. So finding any amount of flat land, you kind of have to pretend that it's actually flat. So it's pretty amazing. It's dense with trees, very lots of deciduous forest, very green, very verdant. We get lots of rainfall. Last year we got 70 plus inches, which is abnormal, but we usually get about 55 to 60.
Wow.
Yeah, it keeps us really green here. Pretty much. I mean, we go through droughts. That certainly happens. But a drought is usually maybe like a month without rain. So it's extreme humidity too. I mean, we're pretty much all summer at about 100%, which has, impacts on the garden and those sorts of things as well.
And what's like the duration of like your growing season then?
Yeah. So we're frost free from essentially May. They say like Derby weekend, May, somewhere around the first Sunday of May. But we had a frost on May 12th, our first season in this new area. And we go frost free until about October 1st to October 12th, somewhere around that area. So it's we get a pretty long season. Our winters actually get fairly cold. This past year we got down into single digits several times. And it was considered kind of a mild winter. So it dipped down to about, I think our lowest was 4. But yeah, and then we get some snowfall, but it's kind of a mix of everything. Lots of heat, but also lots of cold and lots of rain. And then we get dry spells. So it's kind of Kentucky's an interesting mix of all of those things.
Well, I like that. Kentucky Derby marks the beginning of your growing season.
Right, it's kind of perfect.
Good. Yeah, it just puts you in the mood for a julep for a million reasons, I guess. But
right.
Yeah, and you all had moved away and then decided to move back. So what were some of the things that you felt really called to go back to Kentucky for? And what did you perceive to be the challenges, not only maybe in terms of the climate, but maybe the broader context for starting like an actual market farm?
So we both grew up in this area and then had moved away. Before we were involved in agriculture, we had moved away. So I was living in Chicago, just like as an artist. And then Jesse was living in New York City, working in wine sales. And sort of random things brought us back to agriculture. For me, it was beekeeping. And for Jesse, I think it was wine, but being interested in natural and biodynamic wines. And so I guess I'll just speak for myself, but like I always had thought of Kentucky as an agricultural area. I mean, I think of it as being a great place to grow crops. So when I decided I wanted to learn how to farm, it just kind of made sense to come back. My family was still here. So that was really what I just wanted to learn more about farming. I did not grow up at all with an agricultural background. Like we didn't camp as a family. Like we were not outdoorsy people at all. So like, it was just something I wanted to try. And Kentucky just seemed like a good place to try it, as opposed to trying to find a place close to like outside of the city or something when I was in Chicago. So that's what like brought me back to Kentucky to learn about farming. And then I don't think once we met and decided we wanted to farm, I don't really think we ever considered moving anywhere else to do it. It just didn't make sense to go anywhere else to do it. Moving back to this area specifically from where we were in southern Kentucky was more about our family, was having a child and wanting to be closer to family, to have a little bit of help by being closer to family. So that's what pulled us to this specific farm, was just moving 3 hours north to be closer to our families.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'll piggyback on that a little bit. We were living in southern Kentucky in where we interned, and we were they had sold us 7.5 acres, and we built a sort of off-grid cabin there. And this is when I say southern Kentucky, I mean it's about an hour and a half northeast of Nashville, if you can kind of picture that. So it's right over on the Kentucky border, but it's a pretty rural. I mean, we were an hour from Bowling Green, Kentucky, which was kind of our main market, but we were pretty far from things, pretty far from our family, and we built this off-grid cabin, and we lived there for 4 years, I think, or thereabouts. And in the middle of that, we had a kid. We had our first son. And at that time, we were kind of realizing like the sort of homesteader life wasn't really going to afford us everything we needed and that our new son would need. And then also wanting to kind of have him have a relationship with his grandparents was really important to us. So it kind of changed our, at the time we were okay with just sort of homesteading and getting by, and we were doing all the homesteady stuff. We had goats and we had chickens and we had, just kind of little flocks of stuff, and we did pigs and we did everything, but we did it in very small amounts. And then we had a garden and then we worked with our neighbors, but for the most part, like we weren't really trying to turn our life and our farm and our homestead into a business. And then when we decided, like after having the kid, that we realized we really kind of needed to do that, looking around, it didn't seem like the right place for us. So when Further came along, our son, we kind of, all those things added up to us looking for new property that was closer to our family and closer to a market.
And so when you were both kind of, considering growing food or having this homestead, were you interested in no-till at that time? Like, was it kind of with a lot of what was driving you, this kind of like, these aspirations and the philosophy? And it sounds like the bigger picture of like the importance of food production was certainly influential, but had you already started thinking about no-till and these other types of farming practices that you wanted to employ?
Thinking back to like when we really first started and we were just kind of homesteading, a lot of the stuff we did was no-till. We were super interested in that. The very first ground that we plowed, you like plowed with just a broad fork, like went into sod with a broad fork and flipped it over, like all the way over, and then like a quarter acre, and then we rented a rototiller and like tilled that up, but then we heavily mulched everything, and we were super idealistic. And then I feel like we kind of moved a little bit away from that, thinking, oh, this is ridiculous. And it's funny to me now that we came back to that. And yeah, but I don't think we ever would have said, like, oh, we're into no-till, but it definitely fits more with like our younger selves and sort of having these really lofty ideals about how we wanted to farm, and then thinking, oh, this won't work on a financial, like it won't be financially feasible, and then kind of coming back around full circle. But yeah, I'm sure Jesse can speak more to that. But that's funny to me now, that to find where we are and see a little bit of our younger selves, coming back around to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Like, it's very true. I mean, it was always in the back of our minds, even when let's see, after that garden she was talking about, the 1/4 acre we did with the Broad Fork, we tried really hard to go it for a couple seasons with just going into mulch, and by mulch I mean hay, and that was like we really wanted that to work, and we had access to some really rough hay, and it was giant round bales that you would essentially push out over the garden, and they were rotten, but they were rotten so essentially they were really hard to manipulate, and they were also really heavy, but our neighbors had excess amounts of them, so we would often trade work for them, and they would bring them over, and then we would try and push them out over the garden, and that worked. I mean, the soil really loved it, but what we found is that we would get a lot of weed pressure within that straw and within that hay. Well, sorry, it was all hay. So within that hay, we would get a lot of weed pressure from the grass and the seed that was in the hay. And, there's this kind of, I think, a misconception maybe that won't germinate because it's not getting down to the soil, and there's all this, hay over top of it. But what ultimately ends up happening is that weed seed just germinates right there in the rotting hay. So it doesn't need the soil, it just starts going. And that became really problematic, and that was really hard for us to keep up with. And so we kind of, at that time, sort of decided to write no-till off. Not entirely. We just didn't think it was possible on any sort of commercial scale. And, we weren't really aware of people like Charles Dowding. We'd kind of heard of Ruth Stout. But for the most part, we didn't know of any real production models. And this would have been 2012. We weren't really aware of any like actual production models. So the next best thing for us was, I think we worked with our neighbors, and they did tillage, but minimal tillage. And they did some no-till stuff too. We planted, one trial that was really amazing was we did rye, vetch, and I want to say there was maybe crimson clover. And we tamped that down with them. These were our mentors, and we tamped that down with a roller and a roller crimper. We went over it a couple times and just got it to hammered into the ground and killed. And we planted our early tomatoes in that. And we just dug the hole and planted the tomatoes, so there was no tillage going on. And it's funny because my initial reaction to that, because of the way that the tomatoes performed, was that it wasn't a great idea, because the tomatoes essentially kind of like yellowed a little bit and kind of weeped, and just, kind of because they went into pretty cold soil. But then in retrospect, and talking to my mentor just recently, we were talking about how great of a tomato season that was. And he reminded me of that no-till endeavor, and it kind of clicked for me. So we did a lot of that stuff. They were very conscious of, in our mentorship, and when we started working with them after our two apprenticeships, after we started working with them, they were very conscious of soil health and all those things. So that was kind of always certainly in the back of our heads, was trying to reduce our tillage and those sorts of things. And I mean, that's kind of where we came across the methods that we used for a couple of years, which were like very similar to what J.M. Fortier does. We went and bought the J.M. Fortier BCS package from Earth Tools, and started farming that way, because we felt like that was the closest thing to what we had envisioned. Very minimal tillage, very minimal disturbance, and it was ecologically driven, which I think really inspired both of us.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think that there was even a thread at some point in that forum that was talking about, just how important, what are your neighbors doing? What type of resources do you have around you? And so, like, your story of making use of this kind of spoiled hay, because that's what you had available, and this sort of constant experimentation, I think just makes a lot of sense to, I don't know, just appreciating like your process overall and just the way your methodology seems to have kind of evolved. But something that you've spoken to a lot that I really appreciate as well is just kind of, you know, tempering a little bit the, you know, our highest, most idealistic selves with the reality of, you know, like how economics plays into that. And so if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit about just the way that that has, you know, shaped your practices or how you make decisions, because I think that that's something a lot of people seem curious about, which is just, you know, how you put things into practice. And you've been very deliberate through your farm and the forum of talking about, you know, no-till, but really in these for-profit situations, so that we don't just sort of ignore the fact that we're living in this sort of capitalist society. So if you could give a little bit of just like insight into how you guys process decision making and think about things, you know, together as this farming team, that would be really helpful.
Hannah's literally nursing him while we're doing this.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that there's this balance that has to be considered. Going back to the homesteader thing, for me, that was a big realization for us that we kind of went into it thinking, you know, we didn't really care about money. And we still, you know, it's not our most important form of capital, but we didn't care about money at all. We figured we would sell our extra, we'd grow what we needed and be able to kind of get by on that. And to an extent that was effective, especially before having a kid. You know, we were able to do it. But then when we stepped back and looked around, we realized we weren't putting any money in savings. We weren't able to afford things that built our farm. So a lot of the, you know, sort of permaculture projects that we had in mind, or like finishing the cabin, a lot of these things got pushed back because we couldn't afford it, because we weren't thinking of our farm as a business. And so we started to really do that, you know, after our son was born, and then after we were, you know, starting to look at new land, and before we moved, we were trying to really rein that in a little bit, because we realized like money is, you know, if you're not making money, building your farm is really difficult. So there's a lot of bootstrapping that went on our part, but it was, there were a lot of things we were just unable to do. And we realized how long it would take us to get to that point. And so we started to consider business more. And I also, Hannah and I talk about this a lot, just the idea that it's like it's almost as if you can think about your farm not enough like a business, but you can also think of your farm too much like a business. And there's this balance, kind of what I alluded to before, is just this balance of trying to figure out how much you need to earn to do what you want to do and to successfully earn that amount. And then also enjoying why you got into farming in the first place, like still being able to pursue some of those homesteader ambitions. And those are really, that is a constant tug of war between, you know, the farm business and the farm life. And we're really trying to figure out, that to me is going to be just a lifelong battle of trying to figure out trying to find the balance. Because it's really easy to start getting into the business stuff and slip into an idea of it being either, hi buddy.
I just wanted some milk.
You just wanted some milk? Yeah. Okay, go. Mama's gonna get you some milk. Great.
I was just gonna say, I think those years where we were really just homesteading though were like so fun, and I think they were important that we did that, because it was just fun, and we didn't have a lot of bills yet. We didn't have a kid, and we really got to try out a lot of stuff. And I think they were important for us now to, like, not to have gotten it out of our system, but to have done a bunch of fun stuff and lived that life, and then seeing like, okay, some of this stuff like we don't ever need to do again. We just don't need to do goats. That was not something that we enjoyed and that we ever want to do again. You know, it's also like we both got to travel a lot when we were young. So now it seems like we're happier to be pretty settled. It's like we kind of, I think that was like an important time for us to just have some fun and do a lot of the stuff we wanted to do while we were young. And now it's sort of the balance of figuring out, like, we want to have fun still. So what parts of that can we incorporate that will not detract too much from our business or that will add to our business? You know, because every year we say, we're not going to have animals this year. We're just going to do vegetables. But we always end up with some forms. You know, we just got like 30 chickens. So we still have that homesteader mindset. Like we want to have a thriving farm and home and life. But we know, we just figure out which things will fit and make sense. But I do think I don't ever think we look at that and think like, oh, that was a wasted time where we weren't making enough money. Like, it was super fun. And something, we still try to balance, like, it's so easy to burn out. I mean, as a vegetable grower, I'm sure you know. So, like, trying to figure out, like, what can each of us do that we really love to do, even if it isn't making us direct money or adding to the business, like, so we stay sane. Like, that stuff is still important to us. And we really are, I mean, every year just changing up what kind of fun things we want to grow that is just for experimenting, or what animal can we add that, you know, won't be super stressful. And just to say that I think that was an important time for us and helps us to, just to remember, like, how much fun we had then, and that's still that fun element. Like, that's why we farm. Like, obviously we don't farm just for the money or for the work. Like, it's because we love it, and trying to figure out the elements that will fit in with us now being just having to be more business minded.
Well, that really, I just appreciate both of you expressing, like, it just sounds like there's so much care together and how thoughtful you both are. And I don't want to delay the milk delivery, but I do think that segues really nicely into, Chris Polk from the no-till community submitted a question where they wanted to hear the ins and outs of farming as a couple with children. They have 3 kids and another that'll be born next month. And so any tips, tricks, communication strategies, time management, all of those things interest them quite a lot. And me as well. My spouse isn't involved in my farm, and sometimes I think that it's hard because it feels like, I'm married to the farm, and it can be hard on fostering other relationships and even friendships. But certainly, farming with a partner brings up other challenges and, balancing that with a family. So if you guys wouldn't mind speaking to that a little bit.
This is so appropriate for the question, Christina. All right, I'll pick up the phone in a minute. So you can just talk.
Yeah, that's fine. It's funny. I mean, the thing with children that we've found, or that I've certainly, I think that we would agree on this, is that it's kind of this ever evolving thing because they're always growing and changing. And so further, our oldest is 4.5, and he kind of does a lot of his own stuff. Obviously, he still has needs and still needs a lot of attention, and which is all great. But he kind of is a little bit more independent. And having one kid is, kind of a different story. And every season, they're a different kind of child. So the first year was pretty easy. We could wear him on our back. He was born in December, so he was really, by the time the season got going, he was still just getting, he wasn't really moving yet, and further didn't crawl really. He just started walking at 1 year, the week he turned 1. So he wasn't moving around too much, and it was pretty easy. We were able to wear him. We were able to just kind of set him down. He would stay put. And then year 2, was much different because he was mobile, but he didn't really understand the word no, and it was much more dramatic in year 2. So, and that all kind of changes as they age. So, by year 3, when he would turn 4 and all that stuff, he was much more independent. We could kind of send him and he would go play on the compost pile, or he would play with some toys, or whatever it was that he wanted to do. And then injecting another kid into the mix has been has kind of definitely changed things too, because the 4.5-year-old still needs attention, and but then there's a baby. Ellis is 7 months, so obviously, and he's more mobile than Further was, so he's moving around, and there's a lot more attention needed to be paid to just watching him.
Yeah, I think it's always changing year to year, but it's just, I think with farming with kids and sort of having expectations, it's just like day by day. Like some days go really great, and some days just it's not happening. And I think if, like for me and for us this year, we sort of considered like, I'm a full-time mom, obviously, we're homeschooling, but I do still want to be farming. Like that's still something I want, and something I see in the future myself moving back fully into that role as the kids get older. So something we've considered is, we have a part-time employee this year, which has been really awesome, but we've also considered hiring like a nanny. Like instead of hiring a farm employee, hiring somebody to be at the farm and watch the kids. And then I can go back and help Jesse since I already know, most of the things. I think that is an option for a lot of people who are farming with kids, to have somebody there at the farm to sort of help with childcare. If the husband and wife or whatever, the partners want to both be farming again, I think thinking in terms of farm employees being for the kids instead of for working is a really cool option.
Yeah.
But I mean, this year, right now, Ellis is 7 months old. So having a part-time employee has been good for me on those days where it's just not happening and I just can't even make it outside. Like I'm just on mom duty and house duty. I don't have as much guilt or whatever feeling. Knowing someone is out there helping Jesse makes me feel less like frenzied and pressured to like run outside and get something done with, upset kids. So it's even an employee, like I don't always maybe get to do as much as I want, but I feel more at ease about it. And like everyone's in a happier mood if I'm not forcing, them to be outside when they don't want to be outside or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been helpful too. And I think it's just, like I said, like someday, I think just putting too much expectation on yourself that like you'll have kids and just nothing will change and you'll just get to go back out and work is like some days it just feels magical like that, the babies and the, backpack carrier and you're out there like weeding and hoeing rows and just feeling like a super mom. And some days like nobody, we don't even make it outside into the sunshine because everyone's just whatever. It's just like, and I think that's just life in general with children. So it's the same. It's the same if you're farming. Like you've just got to not put too much expectations on yourself, but also not like sometimes I think things won't go well and I just like throw the baby in the carrier and we go out and it just gets done because it has to, like just with any other farming job. Like you just get it done and sometimes it's pretty and sometimes it's not. But yeah, those are sort of some of my thoughts. I mean, like people ask for advice on farming with kids and I'm like, I don't know, you just do it. Like, it's just like, I'm not doing it well. I'm just doing it because that's our life. Like, it's just like with anything, like you just do it. And I mean, some days everyone is crying, including me. And like some days, we have awesome days and like we homeschool and we get everything done and it's really great. So, and people who follow us, like anyone, you follow somebody on social media, you might think it's great all the time, and obviously it's not. But I think people looking for advice or like the perfect formula, it's just like, just go for it. Like you can do it. Don't be intimidated by it, but also like don't set yourself up to be disappointed. Like it will be hard and it won't always go great, but yeah, it's just it's just that's why we do it, right? Like we want our kids to be there. We want them to be around and see the farming, and it's a different level of commitment to the work, I think, but it's one of the most important reasons that we do it, like is taking care of the earth this way for our kids and feeding our kids with food.
Well, it sounds pretty epic because basically you've just described like doubling down on just pure anarchy. Farming is so unpredictable. It's just, each day is so different. And are there anything is there any practice that you all have built in just in terms of like things that help just really feed your relationship or, kind of foster the type of connection with your kids? Like just little things like, do you go on a walk each night through the farm or just little things that you try to be intentional about that can just kind of help when everything is kind of just, going crazy?
Yeah, I think one thing that we do really well, I mean, there's several times that it doesn't work out, but we have every meal together. We intentionally really set it up so that we would be at home. Like we've never even really considered sending the kids somewhere else or anything like that. Like even when it's hard, we're doing that because we want them to be a part of the farm and to grow up on a farm and be on a farm. And so we have every meal together, and then we have movie night once or twice a week where we all sit down and watch. Right now it's cartoons. Hopefully when they get older, it will be probably more cartoons. We all kind of like Pixar. But, basically we try and then there are things that are just, there are little things that I think both Hannah and I do. I was talking to our employee earlier today just about being in the garden and working, and our 4.5-year-old will run up and be like, oh, I want to help you with that. Even though we're trying to really get it done fast, just taking a moment to let him do that and realizing that he's not going to do it for any more than 30 seconds. And then it's going to be an experience for him and he's going to run off. Like, I think that expectation thing Hannah talked about is really an important part of it too. And setting realistic goals and expectations, and also being okay with sometimes not meeting them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you asked that question. I'm like, oh, we should be better about that. We should have more. We do take walks, but yeah, like, continue. Sorry, I have to talk this further for a minute.
It's fine.
No, I mean, I really appreciate this part of things. I had, this farmer from Nevada City, Alan Haight, who's this really amazing farm mentor, in his business enterprise class, like always talks about like making time to go on a retreat where you just think about like that quality of life things and not get too bogged down in, just the one facet of the farm being a business, and you look at the other, parts of your life. So the fact that both of you, it's kind of been integrated in all of your answers. It's been really cool to just hear you kind of speak specifically about it. Even if you think you don't have advice, I think it's just amazing to hear your perspective for sure. Okay, well, do you mind if we geek out a little bit just in terms of like maybe just talking a little bit about, your evolution with your farming practices and kind of what's working right now in terms of your system and some of the methods that you're employing? Like, what are you excited about? What do you feel like you're seeing in your field that is inspiring?
Well, basically, like some of the stuff that I'm seeing that's super inspiring right now, and I've talked about this a little bit in the podcast, is just the number of ways people are making it happen and doing it for the right reasons. One of the things that has really been on my mind lately is kind of this idea of defining no-till and realizing that it's really hard to define it, but the main theme that sort of seems to bring it all together is a desire to have healthy plants and healthy soil. And whatever way people are achieving that, to me, is more no-till than any sort of definitive implement is and is not no-till. Or, like a lot of people really want to talk about the broad fork or the tilther or stuff like that. And that's fine. I totally get that. But if that's a tool that gets you closer to the ecological functioning, to what Carl Hammer called photosynthetic efficacy, I think that's an important thing. I mean, I think that can still be no-till because I'm not necessarily, I don't want to be an authority on what that term means. I think it should be kind of loose and people should kind of decide what it means for themselves. But it's one of the things that's inspiring me is how
many ways it can be done to achieve that sort of ecology and to achieve a healthy soil. And we're doing it in many different ways on our farm to kind of find what the right one is for our climate, for our environment. You kind of touched on it earlier with the kind of materials we have available to us. All of those things, like adding them up and trying to figure out what our system is, what makes the most sense, and what our toolbox looks like. In some cases, I think it, is for us like a deep mulch system where there's really no broad forking, there's no, anything like that. We're just laying down a thick layer of compost and we're sort of planting straight into that. And then other times I kind of like a lighter mulch, like a very thin layer just to keep the soil covered and then kind of going straight into the soil with plants. Hi, Ellis. No, I mean, there's such a variety of options now, and that I feel like when I started the podcast thinking these are what I want to find. I want to find, methods like yours, Kristen, and like, so many different, this week, although it hasn't aired yet, Brian O'Hara, hearing his methods and even, and getting to speak with Singing Frogs, Elizabeth, about their methods, and Alex Eakins, I really loved his, and then Frith Farm, all these different styles. There's so many different ways to do it, and that really inspires me. And I think that in the same way that certain things can't be ruled out as no-till, certain things can't be ruled out as tillage. I think that sometimes I look at my tarps sometimes, and I think this to me is tillage in a way, because it can create compacted areas. It creates kind of an anaerobic environment. And it's a placeholder. It's sort of this like lazy thing I do because I don't want to go in there and just rip the crop out. I want to just put something over it and have the sun do it. And I sometimes think like that's not the best ecological move I could be making. So in a way, that's more tillage than a lot of the other things I do. And I think that's been something I've been really chewing on lately and trying to figure out how to do less of those sorts of things and just continue in that sort of continuous motion towards something that I think of as what I have this ideal of no-till and a good, where the soil's always functioning, the plants are always healthy. That's what I'm always looking for.
Yeah, I think that, just the forum that you all created through your farm is pretty amazing. And one of the most refreshing things that I found was just being so deliberate about talking about this no dogma approach. And I think that in kind of watching this conversation evolve, it's been pretty amazing because it's been more dynamic as time has gone on. And I think that that's amazing, that as more people have gotten involved and more voices have kind of come into the mix, there hasn't been just a shoring up of like a very linear methodology. And instead it's been like so iterative and so robust in terms of just like kind of leading to more questions. And I think that it's interesting too to see like where there's pushback and like there are people that aren't fans of that. But to me, I think it's just so enlivening to be like every question leads to like 3 more questions, and that just kind of goes on from there. So just to say kind of like kudos to you guys for doing something that I think is like what, anything that's deeply ecological would do, which is to just kind of, engender a little bit more thoughtfulness and questioning and pause about like why we're doing things, what are our principles and what are our values, not just trying to distill things down into, something that feels like overly simplified for the sake of like one type of efficiency. So I think that that's just been really amazing. But I think, what has been your sense just kind of watching this unfold? Like certainly it sounds like you've, had your perspective really constantly shifting. But what do you think, just as watching it as the curator of this to an extent, of the types of conversations that are happening out there in the community right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that I was a little surprised to an extent at how many people had been thinking the exact same way we had, which was there has to be a way to do this. There has to be a way to do this commercially, you know, in a way that we can make enough money to farm for a living. And I love talking. One of the things that I love being able to facilitate that a little bit first is just kind of bring that out. And because I really started the podcast because I had those questions, and I thought, I'm not the only one who wants answers to these questions, so I'm going to share it. I'm not just going to call these farmers and say, hey, what do you do? I want to make sure that other people get to hear that. And I've just been amazed at how many people have been looking for that. And the other amazing thing is something I've touched on in the podcast too, and touched on earlier, is just how many different ways people are doing it, and the people that just sort of stubbornly figured it out. And I love that. I love that, thinking about Brooke from our conversation with the Herbivore Farm, and just they just refused not to go no-till. Like, they just decided, okay, well, this is they saw, I think, Patrice grow, and they kind of, you know, went off his model and sort of just decided that's what they were doing. And I love that. I love that there's a whole world of people that feel exactly that same way. This is what they want. They want to reduce their tillage, and they want to farm more ecologically. They want healthy, consistent crops. And that has been really exciting and really inspiring to me, is just to see how many people really wanted it and how excited people are to hear more of these methods. I mean, we're the same way. We're still farming. I think about this a lot. Like, Hannah and I don't want to stop farming and just be a podcaster, or stop farming and just run a website. I want to do this because I want to learn how to farm better. We want to farm until we're 60. So, you know, and we want to retire from farming. And so this isn't like a side project that I hope turns into a main gig. This is like something that we also need as farmers, which I think is an important point.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many other conversations that are not just specific to no-till, but it's like when people are coming to this with this curiosity, like, there's a million other logistics. And so just seeing things as like some filing control and just like logistics things about different tools and, you know, sourcing different types of amendments and things like that has been pretty amazing to see. Yeah, just how responsive it is, and just how people can kind of turn to their peers for some advice and perspective.
I agree. And it's great on so many levels. Just being able to see so much of the community coming out and sharing, and being so open to share what they do and how they do it, where they get their stuff. And that's something that's really driven the market gardening community in general. And I love that it's trickled over to the no-till community, to be able to share those sort of things and have people be so willing to share their methodology.
Yeah. Well, so Lawrence from the community had asked the question of, how do we speak to customers about soil conservation and no-till simply and in a way they'll connect with without getting lost in detail? And I think that this is a really good question to me, just because, one, I love that I think it's at your farmer's market, you have a sign that talks about how much you love talking about your farming methods. And yeah, when I think a concern was raised about like, well, if no-till is this really huge bucket and there isn't just like one thing that we can pin it down to be, then will essentially the branding of this be watered down? Will it be kind of like greenwashed, which I think is an understandable concern. So yeah, how do you really do justice to this in this external facing way to people that aren't farmers? Like, when a lot of this is really complex, nerdy stuff about the nuance of soil and the nuance of all of this biology. Yeah, how are the ways that you kind of convey that, you know, in a way that does that justice?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I feel like, you know, labels, right? There's all these labels, and then there's the idea like, well, maybe we just need a no-till label, but I know Jesse and I just have issues. Like, we're organic and we love being organic, but we have lots of issues with the organic label. And I think getting comfortable, talking to people and maybe trying to educate customers about asking questions instead of just focusing on labels is super important. We love talking, we love to get nerdy and tell people about what's going on in our farm. That's why we have that sign.
Hey, you all, just going to jump in here real quick to say that whole sign that we're talking about here, it reads, "We're proud of the way we grow. Ask us about our farm values." And it hangs from our sort of centerpiece display. We used the sign for years leading up to certifying organic, and we still use it because it helps us to engage with certain customers and show that we're not just organic, but we're really proud of the way, we grow. Anyway, you can see a picture of it over at Instagram at Rough Draft Farmstead. I think there's also one over at the No-Till Growers Instagram. All right, back to us, I guess.
And I think, even if there was like a no-till label, that is people don't know what that means, right? So I think it has to be about, getting really comfortable talking about your farm and like hoping that people will ask you about your farm and moving away from the idea that everything just needs to be labeled. And if we don't like the organic label, then let's make a new label. And then if that label gets messed up, we'll just keep making new labels until, we find the one that sticks. Because, we want to keep, it's like we want to keep it open to interpretation. So maybe one no-till farm is going to be super different than another no-till farm. So I think, and it's annoying because, it's fun. It's nice to just be able to say, we're organic and not have to, go into all the details sometimes. Like, you want to make a sale and you just want, you don't want to have to explain what that means and everything. But I think if we can do a good job of being excited to talk about our farms that way and tell people what it means, and if customers can start to learn that they can't just trust one word labels and can ask about what different farms are doing, that would be an important movement. Because it's the marketing is nice. It's nice to have one word answers to people's questions, but also it's way more complex than that. All these farms are so different. And I think what's going to make small farmers have viable businesses is connecting with customers. And so being willing to really tell your story, tell what you're about. And getting those words out there where people start to know what they mean, regenerative and no-till, I think are words that are going to start being more popular. But that's what we talk a lot about that with labeling, because when we're selling at a farmer's market, those labels are important to people. And I think you can tell who wants to hear the story and who doesn't. But I think just getting comfortable talking about it to people and getting those words into people's heads just where they start to learn about it is important.
A few years ago, I interviewed James Fortier for an article, and he said something I thought was really great. And he said, I was asking him about wholesale farming, about growing food wholesale. Should small farmers do that? And one thing he said is that that I thought was really poignant was that essentially, they have he basically was like, dude, they have scientists, they have chemists. You're never going to be able to compete with them. But the thing is, they will never be able to compete with you on relationships. If you can build those relationships with your customers, and whether it's a sign like ours, ask us about our farm values, if that starts the conversation, or just being there and showing up every week, even when it's rainy and windy, just being there for that customer, building those relationships, that is more powerful than any wholesaler will ever possess. And I thought that was really cool. And that's something that we've kind of adapted into our sort of farm philosophy in terms of marketing and those sorts of things. Is the relationship element is as important as anything else we do, is building that relationship.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's just it's good because it reminds us of our strength as kind of smaller scale or doing these things that are, trying to be innovative or involve a little bit of risk. It just sort of emphasizes how we can kind of play to our strengths instead of just trying to kind of play by these terms that, a system that's really not set up for folks doing something different. So I think that's a really really good point and a good thing to kind of center on. Lindsay Rojas from the community had also asked a question that I'm curious to hear as well. And they would like to hear a couple of things that you all feel like you do really well and something you'd like to improve on. I was going to ask you for what's your most sort of like aspirational failure, like something that you just really put your heart into and it didn't work out the way you thought, but it was worth it in terms of what you learned. But yeah, something that you all feel really proud about in terms of something you've got pretty dialed in and something that you're in process working on.
I mean, this might be out of order, but Spark, I think, is the restaurant that we're involved with right now, has been like 2 years in the making, it feels like. And we've put a lot of energy into that, and it's just opening. So it's like, I feel like we're still like in the middle of it, of seeing if it's going to, I don't think it will be a failure, but like, we're just seeing how it's going. And that's been something we've like been really passionate about. I'm sure people know, but it's a restaurant here that it's like a pay what you can cafe. So, and it's serving all farm to table food. So that's something as small farmers, it's hard for us to serve like a lower income population a lot of times. Like if we're only selling at farmers markets or we're doing CSAs, right? Like that takes a certain kind of customer. And it's been harder for us to find ways to reach more food insecure people. So being a part of this cafe is just like kind of a dream come true, where we can still grow the food and sell it for a good price, but we can be feeding people who wouldn't normally be able to afford it. So we're super hopeful that this can be good, like not just for us, but for people to be able to eat our food.
I'll just kind of talk a little bit about our role there, is that we're doing, we're obviously providing produce, and then we're also helping to design the menu and work with the chef on seasonality and those sorts of things, helping to aggregate some of the other farmers together to get in touch with the chef and talk about, different elements of working with a chef. Some of these farmers have never worked with a restaurant, so hoping to sort of incubate that a little bit and help them along in the process and learn a lot about it ourselves. I started out in the restaurant business, but I didn't necessarily start in the buying produce from farmers part of that business. So, it's all, there's a lot for us to learn there. And I mean, kind of just touching on Lindsay's question a little bit about what I think we do, or at least myself, what I do well and maybe could improve upon, is like, I think that I'm willing to take risks in the garden is the answer to both of those. That I'm, you know what I mean? I'm willing to look at something and say, I think I could shove some onions into that tomato row. And I do it. And sometimes that's a bad idea, but sometimes it works out. And I just realized, like, I'm lucky in that I'm willing to do that. And it's also a problem sometimes, but I like that. I think that there's an importance of just looking around and saying, oh, I need to do this. This will be a risk. And it's a risk that kind of brings me joy. So try different inner plannings or try different methods. And I'm getting better. Today we almost set up a garden in a way that I knew it wouldn't have worked. And I'm getting better at just looking at it and saying, I don't think this should go. And I think that's a virtue. That's something that we stopped and we just decided not to do it. And that's 2 years ago, I would have been like, let's just keep going. And I think that shows some amount of progress.
Yeah. That's experience and knowledge. Definitely.
For sure.
Oh man. Well, I'm curious if there are certain things, like if you were to tell someone starting out, like what your essential, like 3 tools would be. I think a lot of people have questions in the forum of just like, getting started, this idea of bootstrapping it, like where and when to invest what, I think is a very, good question, I think, certainly for people starting and at different inflection points with people scaling. What are the things that feel really essential on your farm in terms of just like, a good sharp hoe or, other types of technology, even if it's just back-end stuff that helps make your business run smoother?
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, like the three things that I use absolutely every day, almost every day, at least right now, is a good wheelbarrow, a good stirrup hoe, and a good bed rake. I could probably build an entire garden if I had a shovel, I guess, with those three things. I mean, those are all I really feel like I need. And in the wheels, I mean, just having the wheelbarrow is it's so. I mean, those are tools that probably everybody has, but those are the tools that I think are the absolute essential. If you want to start a farm and you want to bootstrap that whole thing, those are your first three purchases. Those will get you your garden and get it set up, and you can do it with that. It's totally possible. Possibly flipping over a pasture or something would be difficult with those tools, but you can always get some sort of a neighbor or something to come and disc it up or whatever needs to happen to get into that soil. But yeah, I mean, you don't need much. And sometimes I go back and forth about that. I think I did a video once about the basic tools you needed, and I don't know that I was accurate. I sometimes feel like you need. I get into the idea of certain tools that have helped us a lot, like the quick cut greens harvester helps us a lot when we're doing baby greens. Does that mean it's a tool you should start out with? Sometimes I think yes, if that's what you're really going for, but then other times I think no, you need to spend a couple years just cutting it with a knife, and or at least the season, just to know when you need to cut it and how low you need to cut it and what it's like to cut it like that, just so you know really what you're getting when you invest in a tool like that. There's definitely benefits to bootstrapping in that way. So, yeah, I mean, that to me is really important, is not just the going out and using all the capital. It's like starting your farm, raising a bunch of capital and buying all the things. It's starting your farm and figuring out what you like to do on it, what you like to grow, and then investing in those tools as you go. I think that's a more important message.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I feel like there's a lot of, like when you're starting off, there's all these books that will tell you like, this is how we do it, and these are all the tools. And it really makes it feel like if you just follow that exact method and get all those tools, that you can do exactly what they do. And there's just so many other things to take into consideration. And I feel like, and just, where you are and what your soil is like and all the things. And just the knowledge base of having those tools. Most of the people who've written those books have farmed for a really long time to get to that level. And I think for a while I felt like we were just getting all the new tools, and I feel like now, we're going back down and really just paring down to what we know is what we need. But yeah, I feel like, the only other thing I would say for our system right now is compost. It's like the most important. It's the thing we invest the most in, and like, I think finding a good source of that would be super important. I feel like that plus the tools Jesse mentioned is like our whole method right now.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to just end with asking each of you, like what's your essential kind of plant to grow then? Like if you had, wherever you went, whatever your situation was, like what's the one thing that will always kind of travel with you that you'll always make sure to grow?
Oh, that's funny. I wonder if I can guess Hannah's, and then I'll bet she can guess mine.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'll bet Hannah would say that she wouldn't want to farm without garlic if we didn't grow garlic.
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh.
That's definitely correct.
I think with a second quick, maybe sweet potatoes coming in a close second.
That's very accurate. Garlic and sweet potatoes.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Jesse would say, I know he says his favorite thing to grow is peppers.
Yep. That is true. I love growing peppers. We just started a bunch of shishitos today, and I was like, we have enough peppers, but I probably could use another 150 shishito plants.
Yeah, and I feel like the other thing we always say, like, we're going to stop growing it, but we always grow it, is sweet corn. Like, we weren't growing any, and then it's just like, but we have to be able to eat sweet corn. So that's another one that, like, it doesn't make us any money, and it takes up way too much space, but I think we're growing just enough for us to get to have at least one fresh ear of sweet corn this year.
Yeah, I think I want to just say that I think that's so important, the sweet corn thing, because that's one that totally, absolutely defines Hannah and my approach to farming. Is that's not one that makes us money. It isn't even kind of profitable, but you cannot buy sweet corn. It is not the same thing as when you just pluck it off the stalk and eat it right there in the field. That is sweet corn. It loses something like 50% of its sweetness in the first 12 hours. The only way you can ever taste sweet corn is fresh off the stalk. So, and that is very essential to our farming for sure.
Well, then I would say, how many plants are you going to grow? Because I have this exact conversation in my head every single year for probably the past 6 years. Like, I can't allot the space on my farm, but sweet corn is, my favorite thing to eat in the summer. But how much do you grow to kind of just make that manageable?
We're going to grow probably 2 100-foot beds. So,
okay.
And we will start them in wind strips, so we'll get a pretty good jump on them. So they won't be in the ground for 90 days. They'll be in the ground for more like 60. So that's kind of the goal, is to get nice big transplants and pop them in the ground right after something comes out. So we're not wasting that space, but also that we're getting enough sweet corn that we can freeze some and eat some ourselves. And if it works out, we'd be able to give some to our shareholders in our restaurant and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, that's ideally is we would grow absolutely as much as we can. If another bed happened to open up, I would probably think about putting sweet corn in
it. Well, that is very good. This has been amazing. Thank you for letting me interview you guys and to just hear about this. And I'm glad we ended on some, ag version of the newlywed game. And so congratulations on a successful farm and clearly a successful relationship. You guys totally, you killed it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for doing this, Kristen. You have been an awesome interviewer.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's my pleasure. And I really, love getting to talk to you all. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, if you enjoyed that interview, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. I always forget to say that. Subscribe so that you know when this thing goes live again in the fall with season 2. You can also check us out at Rough Draft Farmstead on Instagram and YouTube. Check out the No-Till Growers Instagram at No-Till Growers. You can also go to no-tillgrowers.com for all sorts of good updates. Also, please still consider signing up for the Patreon page. That's patreon.com/farmerjesse. Or you can always Venmo us a couple dollars to at No-Till Growers on Venmo. Venmo's like an app, Venmo. We are working on the sound quality. It will always be a little challenging as it depends greatly on factors outside of anyone's control, including internet connections in rural areas and that sort of thing. That Patreon account, however, will help me get all that sorted out to the best of my abilities. So consider that. Also, make sure to send us any guest recommendations you have to notillgrowers@gmail.com. No hyphen in there. Over the summer, if you have no-till questions, hit up the forum at notillgrowers.com. It's in the community tab. Once again, thank you to all of our sponsors, Growing for Market Magazine, Banner Greenhouses, Paper Pot Co., and Neversink Farm Tools and course. We could not have done this without them. Speaking of the Neversink course, it is live right now, and you can get $100 off with the offer code no-till_SPR100. All caps, no hyphen. That's no-till_SPR100. There's a link at notillgrowers.com. Otherwise, you all, it's been an amazing season. I have just been completely moved by the support we've got. Thank you all so much, and thank you to all of our guests. We'll see you again in September. farm your butts off. Thank you again. Bye.
It's chaos down here.
All right. Sorry, baby.